Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show.
This show was originally recorded on June 18th of 2019.
Guys, I have some follow-up from my debacle, we'll call it, working with Unify equipment. Usually I have a positive story for Unify, but as you guys know from a couple weeks ago, that I didn't have such a great time setting up equipment on site. And I broke my own rule about setting up equipment, adopting, upgrading, all of that while on site at the client. I've made it a big point with my staff to just say this all should be done prior to arriving. And just to recap, I had purchased equipment on my way to the client, so I figured it's an easy stop. I'll just adopt and set up on site. And at the end of that day, I was unsuccessful and had to go home with my tail between my legs, and a very unsuccessful day that was, as you know, very disheartening. So to bring this back together, I had a USG, a Unify USG, and two 8-port switches that I was trying to adopt into a local controller, or not a cloud-based controller. And I was failing miserably at all three of them. And I think at one point, Jerry, you had mentioned, hey, just put it back in the box and send it back. And I would have easily agreed with that had it not been all three. I thought something's got to be wrong with what I'm doing or something on the network for this to be happening with multiple devices. At that point, I boxed everything up, took it home, and I had to tell the client, unfortunately, hey, we're not going to be done with this. I think I have a faulty piece of equipment. I left. I finally came around to setting it up off-site, and I decided what I was going to do is initially set up the switches. I was going to leave the USG for last. So I connected the switches on my network at home, launched up the Unify controller on my Mac, and I have a little side note about the controller on the Mac. And I went through and I upgraded the firmware, flew right by. I easily adopted into my local controller, the same local controller that I was testing while on site at the client. I was 1 for 1. So I said, well, that's spectacular. So why not do the second one? Second one, 2 for 2. It was an easy process, as it normally has been for me. And then finally came the USG, which that is where it failed. I've had issues with the USG over time with adopting here and there, but I've always gotten through it. But this one simply would not update the firmware. And that it was a requirement for me to even adopt. I had to upgrade firmware. I had tried via SSH. I had tried multiple methods, resets. I tried the careful reset, as Joe called it, where I was resetting it and waiting exactly a number of seconds. I was trying everything, hopping around on one foot. The USG simply wouldn't adopt. I finally gave up. I had an extra one at my office that I went and grabbed, and I adopted that one. And I ended up going to the client site, setting it up, and I now have one USG that is definitely faulty, without a doubt, 1,000% faulty. And you know how it goes, guys. When you get in the thick of things, you think you have your process down, and then you just get turned around because you can't understand what's going wrong. And that's that day that I had. And I was thinking it through. Why didn't any of these work while I was on site? The only common factor there is that I had the USG connected to the network the whole time. Because I had a cable modem that had static IP, I had to have a router/firewall connected in order to get out online and connect these switches. And that was the common factor, is no matter what, if I was trying to adopt a switch or the USG, I always had the USG on the network and online. And that seems to have been the common factor, I guess, as to why I couldn't adopt any of them while on site. It's a strange story, but one thing's for sure, it's faulty. I replaced it with another one that I had, and it worked like a charm, as it should have. So it's definitely that device.
So the one that was bad probably couldn't reach China, and the new one you got had no problem reaching China.
It reached wherever it had to, and it did it quickly. I was staring at it going, yeah, this is going to work. I felt good and confident. At that point, I knew I had a bad device. So, It was pretty brutal just because I think if I had not gotten my head all turned around that day, if I took a breath, I probably could have taken that piece of equipment offline and borrowed another firewall, connected it. I could have done a few things that have gotten myself going, at least to see that it wasn't all three devices. But like I said, you know how those days are where you're just completely flustered and just sweating it out. And that's where I was that day. That was a terrible day.
Now, if I remember correctly, you were doing this pro bono to prove to the client that you thought that they had some equipment issues. So have you done the follow-up with the client where you've gone back in there with working switches, and how was that panned out?
Yeah, that was the kicker. I wasn't getting paid for that awful day. Yes, I went back actually yesterday with all the pre-configured equipment that I had done in my home office, and I came in, and the bookkeeper was there. I said, this is going to take me half an hour tops, and that's what it should have taken me the other day. And that's exactly, it took me 20 minutes. I plugged in stuff. It came up online. I already had pre-configured the static IP into the USG, so it plugged right into the modem, got online. They were all good to go. I even exported the site because I had all done it on my Mac. I had exported the site from the Unify controller and imported it into a controller on a computer that would be sitting there because I wanted it to be on site if we had to bring it up at any time. And that worked like a charm. And I was out of there in no time. And I was like, man, this is the way it should have been. But that was just yesterday, and they don't have any shows for a couple of days. So I have to wait a few days, and then we're going to check back in. And I already have an email prepared to the client as everything that I did. And from this point forward, I'll be charging for any services or anything moving past this. I have additional follow-up, I guess, but I'll let you know how that goes when we get a report back.
Nice work.
Not really. It didn't feel that way.
That's the way I feel sometimes. Like people are like, oh, you're so good. And I'm like, nah, not really.
Yeah.
That's like when people are like, you're a genius. And I'm like, you're not qualified to make that determination, but thank you. I appreciate it. But Sam, that is a great outcome. It's helpful to know I'm not crazy. There is a reason. Again, as much as it didn't. Too. Of course, in retrospect, it's easy to see like, well, okay, I can see that would be a common denominator. But look, none of us thought of that. None of us were sitting here saying, well, did you try pulling out the USG and trying it with just the other? You would have expected a different failure mode, or you would have expected something else to point to the USG. It's just really frustrating when it fails in a way where it's just not clear. It's like, it's failing to do a basic task like updating the firmware, but it's like functioning as far as it's like booting up. It's being recognized. Like you can see the switches that are plugged into it. It would have been one thing if like the LAN port didn't work, and you couldn't see the switches at all or something. True. But just how frustrating is that? You really want a binary failure, and when it's like this kind of weird thing that's not quite cut and dry, it makes it really hard to understand logically. So I guess in retrospect, you can say, well, it was a bad part, and that was the common denominator. But I guess it's a lesson for all of us to take a step back, try to think logically about it. And I don't know what you would have done differently, but man, I'm glad you have the answer.
I should have, looking back, probably doing things differently. I should have plugged in one at a time once I started to have failures. And that's something that I'm thinking back and I'm pretty sure I did not do. You know how you think back on your mistakes and you're like, yeah, you know what? That probably was a move. I've done it before. I've taken out, you take equipment out of the mix to make sure that they're not involved in the failure. And I think during my frustration, I don't think I did that. Looking back now, what I should have done. I'm past it. I mean, that was an awful day, but I'm past it. And I'm happy that the equipment is now in and working.
Yeah. Yeah, because ironically, you were there to prove that there was some underlying mysterious, network issue out of your control, and you basically were stymied by some unknown, undefinable network. I mean, that's probably part of it. That's clouding your judgment in the background. You're like, what is going on here? I don't, it's like, are these cables like wired backwards? Like, what is going on?
True.
So, well, congratulations on getting that all in place, and it's vindicating that you did it in 20 minutes. Like you said, you should have done from the start. So it kind of proves that like this stuff, you know what you're doing. It's just like you can't really, you can't control for bad equipment sometimes.
Yeah, the only good part out of all of that is when I came back, the person that I was dealing with there, she had emailed the POS vendor, the person that was working on the POS equipment, and she goes, "You seem to be the only one going above and beyond to make this work." And I was like, "Oh, you know what? That's cool." That made me feel a little bit better, that she recognized how hard I was working for nothing. I felt good walking out yesterday as compared to the other day because of that.
Yeah, that can make all the difference. It's really nice when clients, acknowledge that kind of thing and, not only notice it, but acknowledge it specifically and point it out. You knew you were doing that. And sometimes it does seem like a thankless task, though. But if somebody actually does acknowledge you for it, at least people are paying attention and they notice that you care and they care. That's a nice feeling.
And indications are that this is going to turn out to be a very good client for you, representing ongoing work. Even though you're going that extra mile and they're recognizing it, which is even a bonus, it's going to pay off.
That's the hope.
So speaking of clients who get it, who understand like the value that we provide, they sort of understand why they're hiring us to care about their issues so they don't have to and to take responsibility and see things through, to the end and to take care of things for them, to take that sort of burden of responsibility off their shoulders. A client of ours shared this saying. It's apparently Persian saying. I've had a little trouble researching it. The way that it was presented to us, let the baker bake the bread, even if he takes half the dough. So I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective on things. And it's got that dough pun in there too, taking half the dough, i.e. money. But then I researched it a little bit and I found this other formulation, which is give your dough to the baker, even if he will eat half the bread. Give your dough to the baker, even if he will eat half the bread. You maybe have to turn around in your mind a few times, but it sounds to me it's like making this point really perfectly. There are certain people that are qualified to do this type of work that we do, hopefully us, and clients hopefully know that it's in their financial interest to pay us these, sometimes exorbitant sums of money to do what seem like simple tasks, so that they can conserve their resources, whatever those may be, their time, their attention, their energy, for other things that they specialize in. So obviously we're the bakers in this equation. And, if the proposition is like, well, I could take all this dough or all these raw materials here and, I could bake some bread that's probably decent, but without some practice, it's not always going to work. I might end up with, wasting half the ingredients half the time. And plus, hey, it's going to take me a lot of time. I'm going to need ovens and equipment and things. Or, I can just hire someone to do this task of baking bread for my family. I can then use my time for other tasks related to that responsibility of taking care of my family. It applies, I think, really well to us as consultants. And it really illustrated this particular client who totally understood our business proposition. But I thought it would be an interesting thing to bring up. Have you guys ever heard that phrase?
I've not.
I have not. Now, this client quoted you back that phrase after listening to your value proposition?
Yeah, so she knew this phrase. I guess it's a saying that she was familiar with already. It perfectly illustrated the value of our, in this case, we were talking about our managed service offering and how we monitor things. We let you know if there's an issue. We basically manage your systems for you. She right away got that value proposition.
I love this client. I want that client, Joe.
Yeah, right?
I know. If I could only clone, clients who really understand this situation. It reminds me there's this old trope in computers, and let's say it's like a whole assembly line that's down or whatever the situation is, and there's this big old, mainframe computer system, and they hire this technician, not knowing why this thing is not working, and all these people are losing productivity and whatever. The consultant comes in, opens up the side of the machine, presses a big red button, closes it up and walks away, and everything springs back to life. The consultant hands the customer the bill for, whatever number of $1,000 for a day's work or something. The company, in this case, I'm supposed to pay you what? All you did was press a button. The response is, you're paying me to know which button to press. If I made a big show of things and took it half a day to, to fix it, would you be happier about parting with the money? Point is, you're paying for our expertise, you're paying for our level of experience, you're paying for us to apply knowledge in a way that takes care of your problems so you don't have to worry about it. Just at a very deep level, we're taking on the responsibility, maintenance and updates and management, but we're taking on the responsibility off of the client's shoulders. That's worth something.
I'd like to compare it to maybe a bomb technician instead. You're paying us to know which wire to cut, right?
There you go.
Cut the red
that
wire.
That really makes the point.
Doesn't it? I'm going to start using that one, actually. That's all me. I'm taking full credit.
Nice.
So I got a little bit of follow-up here from Michael Reinhardt. Usually our listeners will write in or provide comments on Slack. So we have a Command Control Power Slack channel. So if you'd like to give us a little bit of feedback on the show. And Michael writes in where we were talking on episode 304 about two-factor authentication. And he so aptly pointed out that 1Password, which we all use here, has two-factor authentication baked into it. Even though I read that some time ago, I think they added this feature. I never really looked at it. Sure enough, there it is. Attempted to use it and add it to a couple of my accounts, and it worked great. And so it really gave me food for thought to possibly move away from Authy or even Google Authenticator and just have everything sort of one place, one-stop shopping, and 1Password. In examining this, I made the observation that my 1Password is stored in my Dropbox vault. And now, of course, if you sign up for 1Password for teams or 1Password for families, you can store your vault with 1Password. So there's an ongoing maintenance fee or an ongoing subscription fee to be able to use that feature, but I think I'm going to move off of Dropbox for my encrypted vault and put it directly on 1Password. And I was wondering how you guys roll.
I can say that we use the for Teams version as well, and can't remember how long ago we found out the consultant's discount for 1Password, and that's what got me moving. I was using my iCloud account to synchronize my 1Password amongst my devices, and
right,
now we have
another option.
Yeah,
as well.
And now we have it with them as well, and we're using their vault and their system through 1Password for Teams.
How about you, Joe?
Yep, I'm doing the same. Yeah, I migrated a little ways back. I actually had switched to it when I needed that functionality to more easily share vaults and control, permissions and things among my team members a couple of years ago. And then I discovered later on that, they had this free offer from 1Password for Apple consultants to use that Teams feature. I was able to request access. And so I migrated my previously paid Teams account over to their free, Teams feature. It's a really great option. My primary vault, I think, is still syncing with Dropbox. That's my personal 1Password vault. So I kind of use a combination of both, but I do like the idea for clients, especially of having a much more simple setup. Like we have clients where we had to set up through Dropbox, and I actually have a client who's using both the iCloud syncing and a Dropbox syncing vault. So they have their own personal stuff syncing through iCloud, and then they have their 1Password vault for their company use to sync with a couple of their employees through Dropbox. Now that was, I think, set up before the Teams option. Now it's a much simpler setup for that kind of thing. You don't have to set up a Dropbox account if they don't already have one. You don't have to worry about, how those two things kind of intersect. It's nice to just have it be like an account you just simply add to 1Password.
I know that LastPass for years has offered to store your encrypted vault with LastPass. I don't hear too much discussion, at least in the advertisements for 1Password when I'm listening to other podcasts, on storing your data with 1Password. Does anyone have any more insight as to how that data is handled? I assume it's encrypted, obviously, but do they have server redundancy for storing this information? I don't really know.
That's a good question. I did research them a while back, a number of years ago. I did a pretty deep dive on some of their security documentation. They provided a lot of info. I don't know if it was just overwhelming to the point that, all right, well, I'm convinced, I've read enough of words here, because I don't know if I'm qualified to assess, their security model and determine whether it's truly secure. I know that 1Password seems to me that it's more cumbersome to set up than other systems. And I think that's a side effect of it being secure. These supposedly secure systems that have this really easy onboarding process, it doesn't seem good to me. There are some that I've seen with the clients use where it's protected by they just have an account password. It's their email address and password. If you reset their password, you have access to their stuff. So that's not encrypted, because there's no secure token in that sense or any kind of recovery key. It's just log in and reset their password, and then all their stuff is just there. It might be encrypted at rest using some kind of encryption at a high level across the server. In that case, it's not encrypted at an account level. Whereas with 1Password, it seems to be, because if you lose that master password, you're out of luck. You lose all your stuff. I had that happen to a client once to prove it, actually, where
we set them up with 1Password. We trained their staff. Everybody started using it. And then the business owner, she had been using it. And then one day she thought, I need to make my security better. So she changed her master password, forgot what she changed it to. And so she also had lost the PDF of the recovery key. She went to 1Password and contacted them for help with this. And they said, unfortunately, there really, truly is nothing we can do. We can help you get set up with a new account. And that's what she did, manually migrated the data we had to the new account and discontinued the old account. And that was it. That proved it to me, at least. There's no plan B. If you lose the master password and that original
recovery kit,
account,
I believe it's called.
Yeah, recovery kit. Exactly. Then you're out of luck. That's it.
Yeah, that happened to a client of mine, and he was just getting started with 1Password because this is what we recommended to him to improve his security. And he forgot his master password early on in the process. He didn't have that PDF document. He didn't print it out. It was gone, and that was it. He abandoned the whole idea of using 1Password because it was too strong.
That is an adverse effect that can happen to some people. I will say that. Not that it's a bad thing. I mean, I agree with you, Joe, in what you're saying, and that it's kind of shows the proof of its security because of those reasons. It's difficult to set up, and even losing your master password, it's not like they can say, sure, we'll just reset it for you. That's a bad thing. But to Jerry's point, that can have that adverse effect, which it has on some people that are just like, oh, this is just too hard. Forget it. I'll just go back to my notebook.
Right. Screw it.
Right. Exactly. We talk about this with clients sometimes. It's like, we want to make sure you get set up in a password manager, and then you can really have some, hope that you'll be able to stay secure online and manage all these passwords. And we make the pitch, and they're like, they're very skeptical because they're like, well, what about that? Then everything is in there. Then that's going to get hacked. Everything gets hacked, and they just kind of throw their hands up,
Yeah.
And if you follow these procedures, if you keep your password secure, if you maintain this, literally put this recovery kit in the safe, you can be safe, you can be secure, and it can still be convenient. But they're just very skeptical. And I do think that works against 1Password from the perspective of most customers, where they're like facing these, pick this really strong password. Okay, now you have to keep this kit secure. I mean, I think probably a lot of people just keep it on their desktop, and security concern, just be damned. But it seems cumbersome. It's not a normal onboarding process. It's not like, just give us your email and we'll, and then you're good to go. It's like, no, you actually have to go through these steps and to get this working properly. But, we make the case that it's worth it. I guess, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because clients, everybody keeps stumbling into the same issues. They're getting emails with, old passwords that they've reused 100 times, and one site is compromised, but probably it's just a early warning that lots of their accounts could be compromised. Then they change their password, and it's like a password they're using on 50 other sites already anyway. People are just having a lot of trouble with maintaining their own security. I looked through this with a client recently, and I think I mentioned this on the show, that iCloud Keychain and strong password suggestions in Safari are really the way to go for most people. I don't know how long it's been this way, but you can access the saved passwords really easily. So just to kind of beat this drum again, in Safari preferences, you just go to passwords and you can see a list of passwords. It'll even give you the little caution symbol indicating which ones have been reused. You can get the same list and the same feature on the iPhone, so they can, all their passwords are in sync with iCloud Keychain. I think early days of iCloud Keychain, things were more problematic. Just remember onboarding issues being more challenging with iCloud Keychain. Whereas lately, probably because of two-factor authentication, it's just easier to set that up, and it just works really well for most people. And it's built in. I mean, you check a box and then they have this feature. Most people are already using Safari, so they have that autofill built in. The one exception where we do recommend 1Password still is if they're using browsers other than Safari, because you need the 1Password extension for Firefox and Chrome in those cases, or if they need to share passwords with other people, like with their family or their employees. But other than that, I think, iCloud Keychain and strong password suggestions are the way to go.
Yeah, implementation of both are really, really good. And I use in both of them. Some cases where I feel like some sort of access is a little bit less secure, I'll end up using the password being stored in Safari, but at the same time, I'll replicate it in 1Password as well. Before we leave 1Password, I just want to say I'm not a big thinker. There's some of us who are water carriers in life. I'm a water carrier, But Joe and Sam, you guys are big thinkers. Is there any kind of gotcha that you could possibly run into with keeping your encrypted vault in Dropbox that wouldn't present itself if, in fact, you were storing your encrypted vault with 1Password? discuss among themselves.
Yeah.
Big thing.
I mean, I suppose the only thing is it's in another product that could be infiltrated somehow because it's synced to a device, and someone, even though that information is encrypted where it's stored, now someone might have access to it as you sync that to another device that has Dropbox, and people have access to that encrypted data and they could attempt to infiltrate it. That's the only thing I can think of.
I would say at a deep level, the question is, who do you trust to keep that data that is encrypted? Who do you trust to keep it more secure? 1Password, who's in the business of doing that, or Dropbox, who is actually more in the business of giving more people more access to data? It's almost like the opposite business model. Dropbox would love for everyone just to have an account and be sharing files like with everyone they know. They're kind of diametrically opposed in that sense. Aside from that, let's just assume like Dropbox is not going to make it any more likely that it's accessed, but it does provide a potential vector of attack where somebody could just like get access to that file that is your 1Password vault. And with that file sitting on a local machine, what would they be able to do that they can't do if the data is sitting on your 1Password account? Like 1Password protects access to the account and then protects the data in the account with that encryption. So it's like 2 layers of security. If you have it in Dropbox, maybe that first layer is slightly less of a strong barrier. So like, let's just assume, play that scenario out. You have somebody that gets the file. They just get access to your 1Password vault that's sitting in Dropbox. Now they have it on their local computer. They can hack away at it. I mean, they can try opening it. It's going to prompt them for a password. Basically, what you're opening yourself up to is a brute force attack, which I remember reading. I don't know how much this has changed over the years, but again, when I was reading 1Password security info way back in the day, I think they had something like, I'm just going to make up some terms now, like forward hashing, like 10 times forward hashing or something like that. Basically, you can't just like try a password and have an immediate answer. 1Password would introduce a delay that would prevent you from like brute forcing a password in 2 weeks. It would take 20 years or something instead, because they introduce like a tenfold delay in there to throttle those attempts at cracking the password. And so then my curiosity was like, well, what if you just had the vault locally? And, you're not the 1Password app, which has this delay built in, and you're not the 1Password server that has a delay built in, but you've got the vault sitting on Dropbox, you've got the vault sitting on your desktop. Could you brute force it then? And I guess they had this method of using quote unquote math. There's some routine that gets that's part of their authentication mechanism, which inherently takes a relative long time. Obviously it doesn't introduce a delay when you're typing your password in and pressing return. If you get the right password, it takes less than a second, let's say. But there's something about this routine that they use to authenticate the vault that is actually like computationally challenging to the point where like it will delay a brute force attack. So in short, I think that they've thought of that, but I still think probably it's inherently a little bit more secure to keep it on their server versus keeping it on Dropbox.
I love the way Joe comes up with his jargon out of thin air. I think I'll call it forward throttling.
He's a big thinker, Sam. The other pro is that it's much easier to onboard a computer if, in fact, you've 1Password to store your data. So.
Right. They even have the way you can scan, if you're setting up your iPhone, you can like use the QR code on the Mac to automatically pull your account info out of that or something. Right. There's some like built-in ways of sharing that info. So yeah, it's definitely easier to go about it. It's still a couple of extra steps. And, like I said, we've been really promoting a tutorial to clients to say, you can be secure. It doesn't have to be challenging. It doesn't have to be inconvenient. You just learn to use these features. Because I find it really funny how clients will say, I'll bring up the strong password suggestions in Safari. You're getting a prompt for a password and Safari will say, do you want to use this password? And everyone just clicks don't use. They look at the password. They're like, that's a terrible password. Like, who would ever choose that password? And they're like, don't use, And then I'm doing it with them live sometimes. They say that to me. And they're like, but look at that password. It's funny to think like in their mind, they're thinking that like somebody royally screwed up. Whoever designed this thing like doesn't know the first thing about real people and like what kind of passwords they would want, or something like that. It's like totally flawed system because they use these like stupid passwords that like no one would ever want to use. But like it doesn't occur to them that there's like real reasons why that's the way it is. And not to mention, it's also like they think it's going to be so hard to use because they're looking at the password. They're like, well, I'm never going to remember that. You don't get it. You don't have to remember. That's the whole point. It's a failing of the computer industry that nobody gets it. You have to actually explain this to each individual user why this is a good idea to go through these steps.
I had a client who was in that exact position just today, Joe. Not only did she discount the password as being like too long, and like, who's going to remember that? She goes, you can't even see the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It looks like a broken interface. And it's like, no, that's for your security. See, this is my point. You could conclude, look, people are so stupid. But it's like, this
Show
is
title.
Actually like, yeah. It's not only a flawed design. Like, whoever's working on Safari, they're fantastic engineers, really smart people. And I think they did a great job with this feature, with a small caveat, which is like in practice, I understand what they're trying to do by not showing the full password. It's more secure. And also that implies, we're not going to show it to you because you don't even need to know it. And they think that this is implied in the fact that it's such a complex password. Obviously, we're not expecting you to remember it. But again, the common people are like, I'll never remember it. And the Safari engineers are like facepalm, like, obviously you're never going to remember it. It's this like catch-22 where neither side really understands each other. I think that if you go to like a phase 2 with this feature, you just completely mask the password and you say, do you want us to just take care of this for you? We'll just manage your security. Is that cool? ? And then like the client's just like, sure. Okay, I'll try that. Whatever you want me to do. And then Safari will just do the right thing behind the scenes, generate a password, save the password, tell the customer, we saved your password. If you need to know it, you can get it from the Safari menu under preferences or whatever. Obfuscate this even more from the user because people are getting the wrong cues from these interfaces, and it's causing them to make the wrong decisions. And I think that this goes back to like a fundamental design flaw in the computer industry where there's this adversarial relationship between engineers and users. This is the latest example of that.
If in fact they had some way, and they probably don't, to implement that same technology of Safari suggesting the passwords to you across some of the other Apple apps, it might be easier for people to understand because there's more repetition of it, and it might be more widely adopted. But right now, that way of storing your password and suggesting a password really only appears in Safari, and that is unfortunate because, like you say, it's largely misunderstood by the end user.
Well, that's a good point because I think that iOS has better integration because they have the ability to access stored passwords for websites as part of an app. So I don't know, behind the scenes, I think there's a way that an app can declare, I'm the app called app name, and I'm available also at appname.com or something. So if you have like a password stored at appname.com, like that app it'll automatically bubble to the top of your password autofill within an app, as long as the app on the iPhone implements that. And the major caveat being, like you said, that's not available on the Mac as far as I know. I mean, maybe with some of these newer apps, probably part of 10.15, maybe it's available for App Store apps. I don't think it's available currently because I've never seen it in practice that I know of on the Mac, but certainly could be added to the App Store, to any apps distributed that way. I think you're right. If it was more widespread across the system, both Mac and iPhone, it certainly would probably yield better user adoption. But again, the other pole is Firefox and Chrome. People use those browsers for whatever reason, just by habit or some advice they got 5 years ago or whatever. In those cases, that's not supported either. So it's just not consistent enough. Well, one last thing on 1Password, they have an affiliate program, and it's pretty easy to sign up for. As I mentioned, I've been thinking a lot about how to advise users on security, and there is certainly room for 1Password. And I'm planning to do a newsletter on this, and I might even make a single serving website about this. If I'm going to be directing people to 1Password, I might as well get some affiliate bucks for that. So I looked into it. I just Googled like 1Password affiliate, and they have a link to their affiliate program run by Commission Junction, which used to run some of Apple's affiliate programs as well. You can sign up pretty easily. I think you have to be manually approved for the 1Password program once you're onboarded into Commission Junction. Then you basically just get a link and you send people to that link. And if they sign up, you get a few bucks. And I don't know how well it's going to work for the random client here and there. If we send out newsletters and if we direct people to a website explaining all this stuff, that could be a good thing to know about also.
$2 per completed sign-up and 25% of the first year's payment or first month's payment with a $2 minimum. Yeah, so like you say, you do 10 or 20 of these. It could be a little bit of money. A little bit of walking around money for Sam.
It's a free dinner.
Yeah, free dinner. Yeah, sure.
So in addition to security stuff, we've been talking a little bit about Adigy and Watchmen lately on the past couple of shows. And I thought, let's continue that theme. Adigy once I got it set up, sort of just let it run, and let it do its thing for a number of months. But lately I've been getting back into it and really looking a little bit deeper to see how well it can work for me. The more I fine tune it, I think the easier it becomes to use. One of the little frustrations with Adigy for me has been the interface, frankly. It's got a lot of power there, but it's not always easy to discover. And there's sometimes frustrations built into, scrolling and clicking back and forth to different screens. And specifically, one of the frustrations is the really wide table of info about your devices. Like if you're on the devices tab and you're looking at this list of devices for a certain policy or just overall, like looking at a lot of info in this table, which has a lot of columns, and you scroll back and forth to kind of find the info you're looking for. I just used a really simple feature in Adigy to set up a custom table view. You can go in and you can turn on and off different columns. If you haven't spent too much time doing this, you can really get a lot of info about your machines in this table. You can click on the Devices tab, looking at the table of devices. In the top right, you have a little blue button that has the little stack of 3 lines. If you click there, it will show you all the columns you can turn on and off. So you can go through and you can turn on like Mac OS X version. You can turn on uptime, lots of different things that you might want to display looking at your list of devices. Furthermore, after you customize it, in addition to turning things on, you can turn them off. And then at the very top, you can choose Create Table View. And then it'll ask you for a name, and you can just put in your name of your configuration there. And then it will become available in the menu in the top left of the list of devices. So I have my Uptime Review table view here, which streamlines the view to just showing my little remote control options, the online status, the device name, of course, the policy, last online, and then uptime. And then in addition, I have, the actions column there showing the different actions I can do to that device. But those are all the columns I have. And on my 15-inch MacBook Pro, everything fits in one screen very nicely. And it's just a much more streamlined view. And then I thought, well, I can, further customize it. I can add the Mac OS X version and other things like that as I go through and further refine this. But I just thought, what a revelation not having to deal with this like really wide table of data that most of which I'm not actually looking at on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a good little handy tip. Although I didn't create the table view, the customization part is something I recently found out myself as well because I wanted to export some data as a CSV. So that's a good find, man.
Yeah, one of the things I added on, I didn't take it to the next level like you did, Joe, but I wanted to see uptime on all computers. Because there was a time there, and we discussed this pre-show, where if a computer was over 30 days, I was going to take control of that computer and restart. And that didn't fare too well with my installed base. But so I abandoned that policy early on. I was getting angry phone calls from Nana. Yeah, my computer just restarted. Do you know anything about that?
You have to play dumb, right?
Of course.
So it's a really useful feature that, it can remember your preference there. You can have several different views that you might like. From that screen, I think the other tip, this is one of the more powerful features in Adigy. It, of course, wasn't immediately apparent to me, but I've been using it a lot in the last few months, is on that Devices tab, how easily you can run scripts. So your restart after 30 days, manually just kind of reviewing that list and then basically forcing a restart, you can do right from there. You can select your machines, in the column of checkboxes on the far left, and then you can choose which way to restart those machines. There's some built-in restart options. I added a graceful restart in there that uses AppleScript to trigger kind of like as if the user had selected a restart from the Apple menu type of restart. And then, as I mentioned in a recent show, also my Restart Mac per best practice script, which, by the way, I think I have to rename Have You Tried Restarting? It was kind of a missed opportunity. In a future version, I think we could probably look forward to me changing the name of that to Have You Tried Restarting? Because it's literally what it does. I mean, it tells the user, like, you should think about restarting. And then like it asks them a little bit more, emphatically, and then finally just does the restart, whether they like it or not. I've looked into all these different methods of restarting, and I think this is a major part of what we do is like, how do we corral these machines without having to remote into each one and like manually take care of it? I want to basically be able to make a selection of machines and say, just make them good. Just fix whatever's wrong. Like install the updates. If the uptime's too high, restart. Just do the right thing. And, we're slowly getting more toward that. And the scripts that are built into Adigy and that we can customize for ourselves are one powerful way to do that. You can also automate those scripts with maintenance routines. And so there's a lot of power there. I just encourage people to go a little bit deeper than the surface level. And I'd be curious if anybody has any tips on Adigy that we can also bring to the collective. The other place you can find a lot of great info, of course, is on the Mac admin Slack in the Adigy channel as well.
Like you, I don't know if I'm piggybacking off of you, Joe, lately or what.
He's a big thinker, Sam. So,
If we've gained anything from this show, it's that Joe is a big thinker, yes. And that Jerry is a simple caveman.
Yes.
To piggyback on that, I've been diving more into it, as I mentioned in previous shows, on the MDM side of how Adigy works, because I really feel like that's for me, a missed opportunity for me to get MDM enrolled devices and start using the features that Apple allows for through their configuration profiles. I started messing around with two pretty important ones as of the last couple operating systems, kernel extensions and the privacy preferences policy control, which is really hard for me to think of to say, but basically two feature sets where applications or processes have to access lower levels of the system, like virtualization software or antivirus software, or on the case of the PPPP side, applications like TeamViewer that require manual intervention on the local side for you to even gain access to the computer anymore. Like in Mojave, you can't just install TeamViewer and walk away because it needs to be whitelisted to be able to access certain levels of the system, or else you won't be able to remote control the computer in Mojave. So you could do that locally, run the product and make sure you approve the TeamViewer app, or you can whitelist it by creating this configuration profile in Adigy or in any other MDM solution. So that's what I'm starting to do more now of, which is just essentially hand these feature sets out so that we can automatically allow for apps that we need for control or maintenance or anything like that to have the power that they deserve on the system. Otherwise, it's local intervention by the user. And the reason what prompted this, by the way, is recently I had one of my guys install TeamViewer on a computer right before he left, and he just walked out, and then he needed remote access later and realized that TeamViewer needed approval on the local system. You guys know what I mean, right? When you install it on Mojave now,
yeah, of
course. So this is a great thing in that we can now whitelist TeamViewer through this profile, and you can roll out TeamViewer remotely if you want to, or even if you install it locally. If it's approved via this MDM configuration profile, you don't have to do any added steps anymore. So that's what I've been utilizing Adigy for lately.
Yeah, I went through this a couple weeks ago myself and did a really deep dive on this whole concept. I mean, I know about MDM in theory, but you really have to dive into it and go through these steps to actually really fully understand it and master it. And I'm only, scratching the surface of that, but I did get MDM configured under my account and did some testing for my internal machines. One of the interesting payload you can deploy, or basically a configuration profile that you can deploy to a machine once you've got MDM set up, is simply add a message to the lock screen. So it's a really quick way to see it worked. So I did what I did internally for my machines once I finally got MDM all configured and working was I just added a little CIMAC message to the lock screen. And it's just really easy to do. And it was nice to connect the next day to some random machine in my office remotely and see on the lock screen, there's my message. It just automatically got deployed by Adigy overnight or within an hour or something. So it's kind of a neat example demo of the power of MDM in general, but I completely agree with you, Sam. I think the main reason for most people to get this set up is for the PPPC whitelisting. And actually, Adigy has this, what they call automatic PPPC whitelisting for their tools, at least, for the, to authorize Bash to run on the system, to authorize their two different forms of remote control that they have built in as well. And so those things can be automatically whitelisted as long as that automatic PPPC whitelist profile is deployed to the machines, and that just simply requires MDM setup as a prerequisite. The other thing that needs to happen, though, is that the main MDM profile needs to be approved by the user. So there's still user intervention required, of course, to allow these tools to function. There's still no way to trick a user, so to speak, into allowing you to have remote access to their machine. To take a step back, of course, the whole reason Apple has these mechanisms in place is to avoid some kind of way of mass compromising a bunch of machines on a network, or tricking users into giving some hacker access, that kind of thing, just to improve the user security. Of course, our tools need ways of having that level of control. So what's the right way to do it? The right way to do it is to get your MDM profile on the machine, to get it installed on the machine, but also to get it approved by the user. And this was a concept that was introduced in 10.13.4 of approved profiles. And prior to 10.13.4, you could have a profile on the machine, but there was no sort of concept of approving it or not. Now, of course, as of that version, there is the ability to approve the MDM profiles. So in your profiles preference and system preferences, you go to the profile, and if it's not approved, you have an option right there to click approve, to approve the profile. If you're connected remotely to the machine and you're walking the user through, or you're remotely installing Adigy, for example, you can't approve the profile. You have to tell the user how to do it. You have to not be connected remotely, and you have to have them, manually go to system preferences and go to profiles and click approve. Or basically their approval is implied in just simply installing the profile. So if you have the end user, install that main MDM profile just by double clicking it basically and putting in their password, then it will be approved by default. And so then you benefit from all this automatic PPPC whitelisting and all these other features of MDM in general. But that approval is actually key to this whole process.
I'll throw in there, though, if you do integrate with Apple Business Manager, then you get everything, because then they can enroll at Setup Assistant and you get all the approvals. So that's why I've gotten all my clients into Apple Business Manager and Apps and Books for volume purchases. And so in the integrations piece of Adigy, you can add those components in and, in theory, purchase a new computer pre-approved, and then it can enroll during the Setup Assistant, and you get all the bells and whistles. So there's a lot of cool stuff that I'm digging through this that's going to be really beneficial to making our lives easier.
For the simple cavemen out there, count myself among them, if you don't have that set up and you want to make your life easier with remotely upgrading to Mojave, for example, that's where this comes into play for most people. Like in 10.13.6, you could have team viewer access to a machine. Everything's fine, under High Sierra. You upgrade the machine to Mojave and your tools break. You need the user to allow you to get back in. And that's really frustrating if you're trying to do an unattended upgrade and, you've got to have your user on the phone to click a button to get you back in. That's annoying. If they're running High Sierra and you have them, running something higher than 10.13.4, you can have them approve that profile, before you do the upgrade. And then after you do the upgrade, you still maintain your access to the system. So it is a way of getting around that. If you don't have machines in Apple Business Manager, you still have ways to do that using Adigy and just talking the user through it. One other feature on that came up in the Adigy Slack channel was, it's an app, it's a GitHub project that it's called UMAD, UMAD. Basically what it does is it pops up messages on screen and you can customize them, and you can have different time limits built in and things where it basically tells the user hey, we're going to need you to have this MDM approved on your system. Can't do this for you automatically. We need you to follow these instructions. Click here to open system preferences. Okay, great. Now click here to approve the profile. So essentially it can automate walking the user through some of this stuff. I haven't worked on it myself yet. It seems a little bit involved to build it and deploy it and actually test it and use it in practice. But it seems like a good way of onboarding your users to MDMs to have the ability to continue managing them with a minimal kind of disruption.
I got my work cut out for me. I know none of this.
Oh man, you have no idea how many hours I've spent, researching this, getting MDM set up my own account. Then the other thing, Sam, how are you handling, what's the process? Once you have a proof of concept, you've got MDM configured in Adigy for your internal devices. What's the easiest way to configure for a client? I mean, you've got to basically enroll them in Apple Business Manager anyway, right? No matter what.
You don't have to necessarily if you just want configuration profiles to be sent out, but My ultimate goal is to make everything as automated as possible. So Apple Business Manager makes that ultimate goal a reality, because then you can have those devices purchased through their Apple customer number. They'll check in with Apple at time of setup and say, oh, you belong to this MDM vendor called Adigy. And at that point, during Setup Assistant, Adigy will send down your configuration profile to enroll. That's the gravy part after that, where Setup Assistant can be customized to what you want, and all your profiles start to get sent out with pre-approval. That's my end game right there.
I don't know who's buying all these machines. My users, what would you say for a simple caveman like me who has users running Macs that are 5 or maybe in extreme case 10 years old? They're sitting there on a desk and I've got to continue managing them for the next couple of years, as they sit there. So can you add existing serial numbers to Apple Business Manager, or can you somehow like retroactively enroll these machines, or they really have to be purchased and enrolled at that time to be qualified?
I know the answer to this one. The answer is no. You cannot put machines into Business Manager retroactively.
On the Mac side, absolutely. iOS, yes, but you're absolutely right, man. That's unfortunate. It really is. But there's no, we'll say, approved way of doing that on the Mac. If you don't buy it the right way, you just don't get to participate in Apple Business Manager.
It's all about how clear your instructions are to walk the users through approving the profile, because I think that's really the only other way to get the full features and benefits. But, and I mean, otherwise, there's just no way. You've got to talk to each user. There's just no way to like automatically corral these existing machines into maintaining access. I mean, you have to have each person, either approve each tool manually or like get you in. Like, I guess if they get you in remotely using one tool, you can manually approve everything else, like once you're remoted in. But it's either that or having them approve the main MDM profile. Otherwise, you lose access to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's crazy how that little approve button has to be done locally. It's just no matter how much you try and click, it just won't like your remote click, that synthetic click, as they call it.
Of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I